Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rappin With ReefBum. I'm your host Keith Berkelhamer, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Sanjay Joshi. Sanjay is very well known in the hobby. He has published several articles in magazines such as Marine Fish and Reef Annual, Aquarium Frontiers, Aquarium Fish, and Advanced Aquarist. In addition, he has been a speaker at several National Marine Aquarium Society meetings and local clubs. In real life, he's a professor of industrial and manufacturing engineering at Penn State University, where he has taught since 1987. He's actually been keeping reef tanks since the early 90s, and today he co-manages the 500-gallon aquarium at Penn State. Has several reef tanks at home, including a 500-gallon tank, and he was kind enough to shoot some video of that tank, so we're gonna be talking about that in a little bit. But hey, Sanjay, man, thank you very much for being on the show. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. It's gonna
Yeah,
be
yeah.
fun. I haven't talked to you in a
Yeah,
while.
I think the last
so.
time we spoke was at probably the last frag swap I was at, which was the Manhattan Reefs, and I think it was November of
Right,
this past last year, 2019.
right.
Yeah, so
Yep.
it's a shame that these shows have been kind of put on the back burner. But geez, well, hopefully with the talk about a vaccine, maybe the summertime. I don't know. That could be a stretch, but we'll have to wait and see and keep the fingers crossed. But go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, yep, I hope we'll be back to normal by summertime, and I'm looking forward to that. Uh, but who
Well, I guess the
knows?
bright side is we all have more time to take care of our tanks, you know?
In
Yeah,
some
yeah, yeah.
sense, yeah, definitely. My tank hadn't looked
Yeah,
better
right?
in a long time.
Well, listen, everybody,
Yep.
thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And Sanjay and I are going to just have a conversation, and we'd love to answer some of your questions. So feel free to throw out some questions. Scotty Damron, welcome back, man. Appreciate tuning in. Carlos 23, uh, Gao. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Producer Reef, Reefaholic, folks. Thanks for tuning in. So Sanjay, I've known you for a number of years, but for everybody out there, and I'm not even sure I know the real story. How did you get involved in reef keeping? What's the story behind that in terms of how you got yourself involved in this awesome hobby of ours?
I've been yeah, I've been doing it since early '90s. I always kept aquariums growing up as a kid. Back in India, they were always fresh water, but I was always fascinated by saltwater fish. And then I came to the US. I was doing my grad school, and I kept moving from, there's not a house to set up an aquarium. So I waited until I got a house. And one of the first things I did was I set up a freshwater tank. And then as I looked at it, and I would go to the store, and this woman at the store had a 29-gallon reef aquarium. And I was like, what is that? I was like thinking we're getting saltwater fish only until I saw that. And she said, oh, these are corals. I'm like, really? Can you keep corals alive? And I was like, in a small tank like this? I said, this is what I want to do. Right? So I started learning about it at that point. I started reading whatever I could. That was like in 1991, somewhere around there, 91, 92. And I would just go to the store, I'd pick her brain, learn from her, whatever I could. And I set up my first 29-gallon reef tank. So the freshwater tank was dumped and converted into a reef. And within a year, I knew more than her about reef keeping. So that was kind of fun. And then you slowly progress from there. The 29 was all soft corals. Then that grew into 55. I started throwing some stone SPS corals in there. Back then, you could get some acroporas, a few of them, always brown looking, and started doing that for a while. Didn't have too much success. Then I said, I think they need a dedicated tank for themselves. And then in the meantime, I was moving to a bigger house. So the plan was to put up a big tank in the basement. And at that time, then I put up a 180-gallon tank. I had that for 7 years. and then decided that wasn't big enough because I kept filling it up and the corals were growing crazy. So decided then I had to bump it up one more time. And in the meantime, I was setting up the tank at Penn State. So this was happening. So the first 500-gallon tank I set it up at Penn State, and I saw that was doing great. I said, now I can do one at home because I know what to do and what not to do, and set up mine at home in 2006. So this current tank, has been running for 14 years.
Is that the
That's the longest any of
wow.
my tanks has run. My last record
Wow.
was 7 years.
Now, is this the
But the Penn State tank's been running
wow,
for 20
and that's
years.
an amazing tank too. Is this the did you get this aquarium, the 500-gallon at Aquarium Obsessed? Is that the place in? Yeah,
Yes,
I got.
I did. It's in
I bought
Canada.
my 225-gallon aquarium in Connecticut that's been broken down for many years at Aquarium Obsessed. But there's an interesting story behind that, right? Didn't it leak or something? You had to have those guys come and patch it up or
Right.
whatnot?
Well, it didn't leak. There was an ugly scratch on
Okay.
it, on the
Right.
front glass. And I didn't find that out until I filled
Oh.
it up with water. So I was all excited. I filled it up with water, and I brought my wife down to take a look at the tank. And the first thing she sees is this scratch, which I hadn't seen. She goes, there's a scratch here. I said, quit pulling my leg, because my old tank was badly scratched up, and I hated the scratches on that tank. So I was like, this is it. I can't spend, my life now with this tank, because this ugly scratch is going to just keep drawing my eye to it. So I had to talk to them, and it was on the inside, so it wasn't really my fault because I was not getting into the tank and doing
Yeah.
anything at that point. And they had to come and fix it. But I already set up the tank. I mean, in the sense of I filled it up with water. And they're like, you're going to have to drain the tank for us to fix it because we need
Ooh.
to move it. And I hard plumbed everything. And I said, I'm not going to cut out all my plumbing. But luckily, I planned it in such a way that I had enough unions and everything that I could undo all my plumbing. We moved the tank. They came on the way back from the 2006 Magna, and it was in Houston. And they were driving back. And then they came over and they removed the front pane and put a different front pane in.
They actually took the front pane of the.
So
They
that
took the
was kind of
front pane of
interesting.
the tank off. Wow, that wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
And then I had to get it back in the right position so that I could rehook all my plumbing
Yeah,
without redoing anything. And that actually worked out pretty good. I was able to do it. I was very surprised that this worked.
yeah. It's interesting. I think we were just talking before the show. I just telling you, I set up a 225-gallon Peninsula tank, and I hard plumbed that in as well. My other tank, the 187 gallons, hard plumbed in, and it's tough. It's tough work to hard plumb a tank in. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. But it's totally worth it. It's totally.
Yep. It
Yeah.
looks clean. You don't have hoses coming off. You don't have issues. I had all these problems with my other tank, so I was like, I need to eliminate all those problems I had before.
Yeah. No, for sure. So, Sanjay, before we go and take a look at the video of your tank and talk about all the stuff that you do to run your reef tank and your the principles and what have you, the things you do to keep it maintained successfully. Let's first talk about aquarium lighting. Years ago, you did a whole bunch of tests with metal halide lamps and reflectors. That was really kind of like the go-to source for many hobbyists. And I'm not even sure if that data is still out in the public domain.
Data is still there. I think reefs.com has the data. They were hosting it, but I think they're going through some reorg and they need to set it back up. But it's not that useful anymore because a lot of people don't use metal halides anymore. But back then it was always very interesting because when I first started keeping reefs, we were using the Venture 5500 Kelvin bulbs. Those were industrial bulbs designed for lighting warehouses. And that was the go-to bulb. And then after a while, we found this Iwasaki 6500 Kelvin bulbs. And those were even whiter. They weren't as yellow as the old Venture 5500 Kelvin bulbs. In the meantime, there were new bulbs coming in that were like, they were calling them 10Ks and 20Ks. They had a lot more blue in them. But people who were trying to grow corals were complaining. Some of them were complaining that there wasn't enough light. And there was lots of arguments going on the bulletin boards at that time about lighting. And I remember getting into one of the conversations. I said, look, I'm an engineer. We measure things, right? You're telling me that there's no way of finding out what output these bulbs are producing. And somebody jumped in and said, yeah, there is a way. You can get a spectrometer, a spectroradiometer, and you should be able to do that. So that's kind of how I got started in the whole thing. It turned out that there was a professor at Penn State who actually had one of these equipment. And I went to him and I said, can I just test a few bulbs here? I want to see what the difference is. And I did that. And I had the data and I shared it with a few people. And I bumped into Terry Siegel, who at that time was the editor of Advanced Aquarist. And he came in, he said, if you write a lighting article and you have this data, we'll publish it. And not only that, we'll give you a little bit of money. I said, oh, great. I can get some money, go buy some new corals from the money. And I can do these tests. I mean, so I said, all right, I did some of these. And I thought I was done. Right? In the meantime, the more bulbs were coming out. And people then started asking me to test more bulbs. And I was like, I'm not going to be buying all these bulbs and testing them, So it got to the point where people were actually telling the manufacturers to send me a bulb to test. So I kept it going for a while, testing all these bulbs, new ones, and then the questions were, how long do the metal halides last? We were changing them every 6 to 8 months, right? And then the question was, are they still useful after that? So I said, I can test that because we can see how much decay we are getting with these things. So, it turned out with a Iwasaki bulb, you could probably run that for 2 years and not see too much decay, right? So bringing in that knowledge into the hobby, I think, helped us at that time, helped me a lot figuring out. Then it just kept careening from there. What about ballasts? What about reflectors? So I kept doing it because it got to be more and more fun because people started inviting me to come and give talks on this stuff. So I got to travel the country. I got to travel the world, actually. I've given talks all over Europe, too. Even Australia, Taiwan. So that kind of became more fun for me. And I was like, okay, I get to hang out with some good reefers. When I go travel, I go see their tanks. And at that time, if you looked at a coral twice, that's what you wanted. That's all it took. We used to share corals with each other all the time. There was no crazy pricing of corals, and everybody was happy to share.
Trading was a much bigger thing way back when I first started, and it's fun, But of course, back.
That's where I met you in Boston when I came to that club.
No, it might have been. No, I was in New York, so I think we met probably at the Manhattan, one of the Manhattan frag swaps way back when is when we probably met. But
I remember you gave me a ReefBum
hat. Yeah, there you go. I'll send you another one.
And I had that hat. I loved that hat for a while. I had it for a while, and then one time I went to some roller coaster or somewhere, and I lost the hat.
I'll make sure you get another one, son.
Wait, finish the story. So I missed that hat because I liked it. So I sent you an email saying, "Hey, Keith, I'm sorry I lost the hat you gave me," and you sent me another one. So I wore that hat for a long time, and everybody would ask me about this ReefBum.
Do you still have it, or is it pretty much tattered? Oh, cool.
I have it.
Yeah.
I still have it.
Yeah. Awesome.
I was actually going to wear it today and sit here.
I could put on a ReefBum hat that's like barely a hat at this point. So it's more of a rag on top of my head. But So what I wanted to ask you in terms of where I was going with that question is you mentioned that not a lot of people use middle halides these days, so the data is not really being utilized that much at all. But in terms of the transition away from halides, obviously to LEDs, and a lot of folks use T5s, but what do you think in terms of today as it stands right now? What light or combination of lights would you say is the best in terms of coloring up and growing SPS? Do you still think it's metal halides or a combination of metal halides and T5s, or do you think LEDs with the technology as it stands today is on, excuse the pun, on par with metal halides?
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on what you're doing and what your application is, right? I think if you still today have a big tank, metal halides may be more effective. Okay, I mean, for my tank, when I first set it up, I was running 3 400-watt metal halides on it. Okay, this is a 7-foot long tank, 4 feet front to back, and I could run that tank with 3 metal halides. All right, but when I had my 55 and I put a metal halide on it, most of the light was just spilling out of the tank. Right? It wasn't even going into the tank. So I think what happens is with people keeping smaller tanks these days, metal halides are not that effective because a lot of the light just falls out. With the LEDs, the light's more focused. It can go into the tank. Your tanks don't get too hot. The problem with metal halides always has been that they produce too much infrared heating. And that infrared heats up the water. Then you got to run a chiller, right? Don't get me wrong, that the LEDs also get hot. They produce a lot of heat, but the heat is not in the form of infrared heating, so it doesn't directly heat up the water. So I think that is a big deal with the LEDs. But for a big tank like mine, I'm actually running more LED power right now than I was running
really?
with metal halide. Yeah, I'm running 8 radions.
Wow.
Right. So if I add up all of that, yeah, the power consumption is actually higher than what it was before.
Yeah,
And I still think I could use more.
Oh yeah,
LEDs.
could you get them in there?
Yeah, I could get them in there. The good side has been that when I was using the LEDs, I started using them about 7 years ago, and you don't have to change bulbs for 7 years. I used these version that I had. I got the G2s first, and I used them for 3 years. Didn't change a single bulb. Could turn my chiller off. Didn't need the chiller. So the savings that I got really came from the peripheral stuff, not directly from light. I still tell people, if you for a big tank, watt for watt, you'll be using the same amount of watts that you will be using with a metal halide to be happy with it. So growth is a little bit slower with the LEDs, I would say, but it's not that much slower. I'm happy with it. I can live with it. I'm not in the business of growing corals to sell.
Yeah.
And if mine get too big anyway, and I have to chop them up, so maybe they'll last a little longer before I have to chop them up.
Yeah, we'll see that in the video. You got some pretty sizable colonies. Yeah, so in the new tank that I set up, I'm going to be using LEDs for the first time. I'm going to be using 6 GHL Mitras over that tank, and it's a 6-foot long tank by 3 foot wide. So I'm going to do 2 rows of 3 each row, and my other tank I've got 2 20K 400 watt radium bulbs, on that tank, and that's chock full of coral and what have you. But yeah, I'm excited. I've never tried LEDs before, so it'll be interesting. So Sanjay, we got a couple of questions actually about blue versus white light. Harry is asking about it, and also Scotty Damron says, Dr. Sanjay, do SPS corals color up better under primary white light / full spectrum, or is it necessary to run blue for a minimal amount of hours?
I mean, as far as I know, they color up pretty well with the whiter light. Right. I think visually the small amount of blue to me looks good. So when I run my tank, for example, I'm running it pretty much at full power LEDs every single channel. Right. So I'm trying to get as white a light I can from these because they're not. I mean, there are limitations on how much white you can get if they're using blue LEDs
Yep.
in there, right? I like the full spectrum look of the tank. I mean, I have to look at my tank, and I like the full spectrum look. A lot of people like the fluorescent look of the tank, and then they like to run blue lights. So one of the questions always comes up is, are these corals developing the same fluorescent look under this white light that I grow them in versus somebody growing them only in blue light? Right. So I've done this experiment many times. I just turn off all the white light, just let the blue lights on, and you'll pretty much see exactly the same colors you would see if I was growing them only in blue light. So it's not like they're not developing those
Right.
colors, right? You just don't see them much in the white light because the fluorescence is overpowered by the
Right.
brightness of the light. But it's there. So, I tell people if you're growing them completely only under blue light, they're going to grow slower. They don't get the full spectrum light, and a lot of colors may not develop. You know.
Yeah. What about the?
But this is the hobby's gone that way. The hobby's gone the way of the blue.
I know.
And every single scientific data that I have ever looked at, or even taken myself, it shows that corals absorb throughout the full spectrum. Right? So they are absorbing in the green, they're absorbing in the red, they're absorbing in the yellow, they're absorbing all of that whole range. Okay. So why not just give them everything because they can absorb it?
Yeah. When I was, knocking around the idea which LEDs to get for the new tank, I was I consistently heard that you got to make sure that the LEDs that you get have enough blue light in them, and that's important in terms of an LED fixture is make sure you get enough blue light to grow the corals and color up the corals under LEDs. So, but I find that interesting in terms of what you're saying with full spectrum, and yeah, well, we'll see.
I mean, I've superimposed the spectrum of a radium lamp, right? The old 20K radiums, which everybody used to love,
I still do.
right?
I
I've
still do.
I've superimposed them on the LED spectrums to see what the differences are. And the LEDs are way bluer than those blue lamps metal halides we used
Yeah,
to use.
I don't think there's any way that I could run the LEDs so blue like that. I think it would just not seem natural to me. But I don't know. I would agree
Right.
with you on that.
I mean, it's your tank. You can
Yeah,
do what you want with it,
exactly.
But if you come back and say my corals aren't growing well, or this is happening, there's a good chance they're not getting enough light. They're not growing fast enough because there's not enough light for them to grow fast. So even the people who sell the corals, and this is where the blue light really came into play. People started selling them at frag swaps with blue lights, and of course you see all the fluorescence, right? So a lot of the hobbyists think that they should be grown under blue light. Well, I can tell you, a lot of the people who are growing corals, then they are also using a lot of white light in the daytime to grow these corals. It's only when they show them, they're showing them with a lot of blue light.
Well, they got to be eye catching, I guess. Saint
Yeah.
Nova is asking, what does Dr. Sanjay think of the predominantly blue 8+ schedule run by Coral Labs?
I don't know much about it. I run all my lights at 100% full power, right? So if I'm going to then start using their blue plus schedules, that means I have to dim all the other
Hmm.
channels, right? So it's effectively I'm actually using less light,
There you go. Interesting.
right? And I'm going to see slower growth,
What
definitely.
do you consistently, I mean, have you been measuring par recently? I mean, when you make switches with lights, do you take par measurements? Do you have a certain level of par that you like to grow SPS at?
I mean, I've found that they'll grow anywhere from 200 plus par all the way up to 800, even 1,000. You know, so I generally don't measure anymore. I kind of
Right.
know now, based on the lights that I've tested and everything, that this light will be
Right.
enough to to grow these. And the adjustments that I make is basically placement of the coral within the tank. If I think it needs more light or would do better under more light, I'm going to put it up higher in the tank. And if it needs lower light, then I put it
Right.
lower in the tank or in the sides of the tank where there's less light.
Do you still get manufacturers sending you, fixtures to test? Does that
I I kind of slowed down a lot of the testing anymore. Once the lights got to a point, with the LEDs, I did a lot of testing early on because there was so much variability, and there was so much of poor light fixtures out there. So it was nice to actually start comparing those. But today, if you look at the top end fixtures, I think they all give out enough light to grow corals. So it's not really that important to keep testing them, right? Unless they change the spectral
right?
mix and things like that. But none of them are not
Right.
even
What
doing
so do you
that.
have on your tank right now? The Radeon Gen G4s. Okay.
G4s right now, but I've got two G5s
Okay.
running in there too.
Well, Sanjay, let's take a look at your tank, and I'm gonna start rolling the video, and it's probably gonna take about 20 seconds to pop up onto to YouTube because we're on a delay. But once you see it there, if you're watching on YouTube, maybe you can kind of take us through what we're looking at. It's about a 10-minute video. I think it's there now. You
I
don't
don't
see
see
it?
it
There
yet.
you go.
Oh, there it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can see
Yeah.
it now. Right. So that's a video from a top view of my tank. I just use my camera to take shots from the top. That way you get a better sense of the size of some of these corals, right? Um, from the front, they kind of look much smaller, but when you look at from the top, you can see that green one on the left. That's at least 15
Yeah. Wow.
inches in diameter.
Wow.
Yeah. Um,
Which do you know which one that is?
yeah, I got it from Denver a few years ago, a small frag. I used to have a coral that I used to call
I
leprechaun
have that
beard
coral. I'm
because
growing that out
you
right
do?
now. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I
Oh.
lost mine a few years ago. And I was in a store in Denver and I was talking to the guy and he said, I've got a coral that came in the wild that kind of looks like your
Hmm.
leprechaun beard. And I said, well, he said I'll give you a frag and you grow it out and see and let me know. So I've been growing that out for the last 3 years. So that's about three
Wow.
years worth of growth. And it's still
I
not
know.
the same. It's so I just joke and I call it that's a poor man's leprechaun beard. I'm still trying to get my original one
Well,
back.
once it's fraggable, I'll make sure I get you a piece there.
I know a
Yeah,
few
I'm
people
sure.
who have it and they've all
Yeah.
told me the same thing, but I haven't really gotten around to it because
Yeah.
now with all the restrictions,
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah. Yeah.
happened. But yeah. But the good thing is like I give away a lot of my corals to people.
Yeah. Your bank.
So
Yeah.
one of my friends has it. Okay, and he's only 2 hours from me, and so I'm gonna get one. That's an easy drive for me to go pick up a
There you
frag and
go.
come back. So that's what I might do, and now then I'll actually get to see the difference
You're
between the
right.
two.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So some of these other ones are just, these are all, I don't remember names
Some of them
of
definitely look
corals.
familiar to me.
Uh, I found that you can get the same coral with five
Yeah.
different names, and I don't care about names. So if I like a coral, I want it in my tank, and that's
Mm-hmm.
good enough for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Um, so unless they are an old time coral that's been around and it's got an established name,
That
then yeah, then it still has that name, and I can
that
remember
looks like a
those
Sanjay
names.
Milka stylo right there.
Right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the Milka stylo.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
a beauty. I got that too.
Yep.
I love that coral. I love
Yeah.
stylos. I'm
Yeah, that's my favorite one. Plus, a lot of my corals have stories with them because I get them from friends, right? And there are all sorts of stories. I traveled here. I picked up this coral from here. We were on this road trip, and that's where we got it from.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Things like that. This Milka one actually was a friend of mine from Netherlands. That's where we got it from, and he passed
No.
away. So I kind of keep that coral in my tank just in
Yeah, yeah.
remembrance of him
Wow.
now.
That's a beauty. How many fish?
Yeah, it's huge. That's one of the
Oh, really?
biggest
It
colonies
grows a
too.
pretty good clip for me.
Yeah, I keep
Yeah,
chopping it
yeah.
up.
Yeah. Now, how many
Yeah,
fish do you have in the tank right now? Do you have any idea?
close
Yeah.
to 60
Yeah.
fish, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what do you think in terms of the theory about fish poop being good for SBS? Do you subscribe to that?
I buy
Do you?
that. I
Yeah.
buy into that. Yeah. I mean, a lot of times our tanks don't. I've seen a lot of tanks that the colors of the corals are much more paler. They're not as vibrant, and oftentimes it's due to lack of nutrients. Because I think the whole hobby went through this phase of really
Yeah.
low nutrients, right? And I kept telling people, like, "Hey, you gotta up your nutrients. This is too low. It's too low. Your corals
Yeah.
look pale." But if people like that look, then
Yeah.
okay, that's fine. But I don't like that look. I like that
Yeah.
richness
Me
of the
too.
colors, and that only comes with certain elevated levels of nitrates and phosphates that we're not running them at really
What
low
are you? What are
levels.
your current levels right now in terms of nitrates and phosphates? Do you know?
The nitrates right now, I just tested them a few days ago. They're like about at 5
Okay.
parts per
I thought you used
million,
to run them. Yeah. I thought you
which
used to
is
run them a
low,
lot higher. Yeah.
which is low for me.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, I don't control it, right? I found that they just
Huh.
drifted down, and there have been times when it's been as high as
Right.
40 and 50. So I never really actively managed my
So
nitrates
you don't.
ever. Phosphates I do actively manage because those I have found that really high phosphate levels start to interfere with growth. I've run the phosphates as close to
Wow.
2, and at 2, basically growth just kind of stopped in my
So.
tank.
Wow.
So now the phosphates are running at 0.12.
0.12. Yeah.
Um,
What are you using for
yeah,
nutrient control at this point? Are you using anything? I mean, are the corals like pretty much acting as the absorbers of the nitrate and the phosphate?
the corals absorb a lot of the nitrates and phosphates, but for the phosphates I do have to
Oh, you
run
do.
GFO. Yeah,
Now,
yeah, because I can't get them down any other way.
do you think it's one negative with GFO I've heard about is that you could pull out valuable trace elements, not only binding phosphates but also binding other elements. Do you think there's any truth to that, or you just do not see any impact in your tank run GFO?
Sure, I mean, GFO removes arsenic. It removes some of those, heavy metals that we don't want in our tank too. So if it removes some things that we need, you can always add stuff back if you know
Right.
what it is, right? That they're removing. Oftentimes we don't know what they're
Right.
removing. I have so many fish, and you can see my fish are not
No.
starving. They're all fat, right? So I feed them a lot. So whatever trace elements, they have to be getting it from all the foods that I put in.
What are you feeding the tank besides fish food?
I've never done. I sometimes will feed the corals. I have this Benepets product. I have Reefroids, and I have other small particulate foods that once in a while, I'll dump it into the tank, um, in case the corals want to eat it.
Right.
But usually I don't feed directly the corals anything. You'll see that from the video of my tank. I have enough particulate matter being
Yeah.
blown around. I don't run
Oh,
filter
really?
socks. I don't try to trap that stuff out of there. I'm like, that could be food
So
for the
no
corals,
mechanical filtration.
except for a skimmer.
And
Yeah,
do you use activated carbon occasionally?
occasionally. Yeah, I don't run it all the time anymore. Um, I just run it whenever I think whenever I do a water change, I'll put some water in a white bucket
Yeah.
and look at it, right? And that gives me a good sense of how much yellowing is in the water. And then if the yellowing looks a little more too much, then I throw in carbon
Right.
to try and reduce that. But I think that's a really good check. Just take one bucket of new water, one bucket of
Mm.
old water, fill them up to equal heights, and look at them from the top. And if you can't tell the difference, then you know
Then you need some carbon.
there's
Yeah. So
something.
now we're actually taking a look at the lights
Yeah,
over the tank, and there's the equipment room.
right. There's the 8
Yep.
radions.
And you got your. So you're also a do-it-yourselfer too, right, Sanjay? Do you have do,
Yeah,
do you
for the
have
most part.
you had an old skimmer there for a while. Do you still have that skimmer that you?
No, now you see I got a little
Yeah.
small skimmer. That's the new
Oh.
Deltec one that I just put in. But right in its place, I had this old ETS skimmer that was modified with the
I
Beckett
had one of those. I had one of those.
valve.
It was like,
Yeah, and I ran that. That was the first skimmer I built for my
uh huh.
180-gallon tank, and I used it until like a few
That's
months
your
ago here. So I used it for over 20
wow.
years.
This is your softy tank right
Yeah.
here.
Yep. So I had one tank that I was keeping softies in. Well, that tank sprung a leak, so I had to quickly set up another one temporarily, and this is my temporary softy tank now. It's been temporary for 2 years now.
I love leather corals. I used to keep a leather or two on my SPS tanks, but I haven't done that in a long time. But they're so cool. I used to have clownfish
Yeah,
used to
I think
host in
that's
it.
so cool.
And you've got how
Yeah,
many clownfish do you have in the overflow of your 500-gallon tank at this point? You've got this giant coast
I
to
have
coast
one, two,
overflow.
three, four
Wow.
pairs. I have 4 pairs in there right now. It's got room for up to 6 pairs. Right now, I only have 4.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, right? You've basically got an overflow from one end to the other in the back of the tank, right? That extends the whole length of
Right.
the tank, and you've kept clownfish in there
Yep.
for a long time.
Yep. Actually, I hate overflows inside the
Yeah,
tank. So I didn't want it inside my tank, and I wanted it outside. And when I was trying to think about the design, I go, why do I make it so small? If it's on the outside, I can make it bigger, right? And my plan was when I introduced new fish into the tank, I would put them in the overflow box. They're in my water, but the other fish can't attack them. So I would keep the fish there originally and feed the fish and get them used to my food. Once they got comfortable, and I would then toss them into the big tank. But then over time, I started breeding clownfish, and I was looking for a place to put my clownfish. So I just partitioned that overflow box, and I made it into a clownfish holding tank.
it's pretty cool. So you're the ones that you bred a long time ago, are the photon, right? The Sanjay photon.
Right.
Yeah, and I've seen a whole bunch of different variations of those over the years, right? Have they kind of evolved?
Yeah, I mean, when I first did them, there was one single. I mean, it was one percula with the black ocellaris, and for a while I raised those, and then the male died, so I had to replace the male. And I said, you know what? I'm going to try and replace them with different versions of black males, right? So there were snowflake black ocellaris. So I used that, and I was still able to cross it with the percula and get the same kind of breed going. Then they had the naked one, so I did that. And, so I just kept changing the male every
That's pretty
year,
cool.
every 2 years, and I got all these different variations of it.
It is amazing how many variations of clownfish are out there. Do you have a favorite one at this point, or I mean, to me, it's just like every couple of months you got a new variation of a clownfish that's come out. It's like now there's like
I love these black
yeah
storm ones, the storm
yeah
clownfish. They're kind of cool
yeah.
looking.
I I
They're
just
very
picked
different.
up a pair of. I think one of them is a mocha storm and one is a an orange storm, I believe. So yeah, I'm really pretty psyched to. I've never had any storm clownfish before, but yeah, those are really neat.
Yeah. I raised a pair of one batch of eggs from the storm clownfish that I have. And interestingly, there's like 10 fish in there that were absolutely normal
Oh,
looking
really?
fish. Yeah, they're
Oh,
perfect. All the bars were perfect and
what are
everything
the
was
odds of that?
perfect.
So Sanjay, let's get back to the tank. I can't tell anymore. Is there a sand bed in there or is it bare bottom?
Yeah, it's
It's always
always
had a.
had a sand
So
bed.
what do you think about sand
Yeah,
beds
that
these
this
days? You know, if you were starting a tank up again, would you continue to use a sand bed? Do you like sand beds versus bare bottom?
I like sand
Yeah.
beds. Yeah. And I don't mess with my sand bed at all. So the sand bed in my tank, when I first put it in, I put in about 2 inches of sand. And once you turn the pumps on, the sand starts
Yeah.
to blow around and settle wherever it wants to settle. So now there's parts of the tank that might actually have 3 inches of sand. And there are some parts where there's barely any sand, where it blows away. So every time it blows away and leaves an open patch, I just use really coarse sand to fill it up, which is kind of neat because it gives you different grades of sand in the
Yeah.
sand bed. Uh, and the fish seem to like it. They find big food from there. If you keep wrasses, they like to
Yeah.
sleep in the sand. So some of those wrasses that I have will sleep in the sand. So they need sand to sleep in. I like sand beds, and I'm not one of those people who goes in and vacuums their sand and does all that. I don't worry about any detritus in the sand. I don't care about any of those things. So my sand bed in my tank right now is 14
Wow.
years old.
Now, besides wrasses, do you have any other critters in there that help keep the sand bed stirred up and clean? Do you have any sea cucumbers or snails?
Sea cucumbers will do it, and then the snails. I keep putting Nacerius snails in there because they go
Yeah.
into the sand, but they eventually get eaten up by some wrasses in my
Yeah,
tank.
Dmitry Tumanov is tuning in. Hey, Dmitry, thanks for tuning in again. He says he remembers seeing this tank in person, never disappoints, and he's asking how the Lonardi wrasse, how that wrasse is doing.
It's doing great. I don't know when you came, Dimitri. It might have been a female at that time. Now it's turned into a
Oh
male.
wow,
So you can see it in the video. You'll see him swimming around. He's one of my biggest fish. And he turned into a I got it as a juvenile. It was all black. And then it gets the blue stripes as it grew into a female. And then those blue stripes, blue and yellow coloration, these yellow stripes. And then it all disappears and it turns into a different looking fish. Right? It turns into a male.
it's so
So that's the one thing I do with all my fish. I always like to buy them as
yeah.
juveniles if I can. I don't want a super male wrasse, right? Give me a juvenile female wrasse, and I'll watch it go through all the progressions, which is
It's
kind of
really
neat.
cool. That happened to me for the first time ever. I had a female African leopard wrasse in my tank, and I had it for several years. And I also have a Chaeto wrasse, leopard wrasse, which I love, and a black spotted leopard wrasse. And I hadn't put any new fish in my tank probably in a couple of years. And one day I walked up to the tank and I look in. I was like, what is that? I didn't put that in there. Like overnight, it changed completely. And I was like, I had to
Yeah.
do a double take. I was like, who put this fish in my tank? It is so,
So that's the fun part of keeping fish.
yeah.
That's why I always, like I said, if you get them as juveniles, they'll pair up too. So that was the one big shift in my thinking about fish was when I set up the huge tank. Because I said, I'm getting away from this. Oh, you can only keep one fish of each type in your tank. But so I said, with a big tank, I should be able to keep groups or multiples of the same fish. So I did that. I started putting pairs of things, at least twos of things. And then they would pair up. And I had way back, like maybe it was like 10 or 12 years ago. I used to have angelfish spawning in my
Right.
tank all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, and you take chances with angelfish too, right? I mean, there's I know angelfish that you have in your tank that folks basically, vendors will say those are not reef safe, but you've had success with those types of angels, right?
Well, I mean, it's all relative.
Yeah.
What's reef safe, right? When I when I used to keep regal angels, right, I couldn't keep any
Right.
zoanthids in there because so you make a choice, right? Do I want the zoanthids or do I want the regal?
Yeah.
Right. It's the same thing with some of the other angels. They all nip. I mean, this is their habit. This is how they
Right.
live, right? They go from rock to rock to rock, nipping, and they'll nip at the corals. But when you have a colony that's 15 inches in size, you don't even see the nip. It doesn't even affect the coral at all, right? So, and you have so many corals in a tank, they don't just keep nipping the same coral over and over again, right? So they don't do any visible harm in a big tank like
Hey,
that. Now, would I put 15, 10 of those angelfish in a 55-gallon? Probably not, because they might cause more
yeah, yeah.
damage
And
in
so
there. But in a big tank,
you don't see any impact on polyp extension on your SPS?
I don't
Oh
care
no.
about polyp extension. No, I never
Well,
did. I don't care about polyp extension in the day. Because every single coral that I have that shows no polyps in the day, at night, it's fully expanded with polyps.
well, in the videos that I've seen, the video you showed us, I think I definitely saw a lot of polyp extension. So
On that big coral, you
yeah,
do see it, right? But you don't see it on some of the other ones. So some corals will still polyp out nicely, and some only polyp out in the night.
so
So
we have a couple more questions, and folks, yeah, I encourage you to ask away. We have I'm going to mispronounce this. Niels van de Voort. What are your thoughts on the importance of utilitarian fish, and which ones do you like?
I like tangs. Tangs are good. They'll keep the algae
Yeah.
mound down. If you don't keep tangs, you'll always find patches of algae growing. So you'll look at my tank. I have different types of tangs in there now. I have a yellow tang. I have a purple tang. I have the blonde, the naso tang, because they eat different kinds
Right.
of algae. Right. So I like those as a utilitarian fish. I like to keep urchins in there. They'll graze the rock too. There's downsides to urchins because some of those urchins will pick up
Yep.
stuff and put it on their back and move it around for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. We're
I don't like sand sifting fish only because if they keep sifting sand all day, then the tank becomes a little bit cloudy. It doesn't stay as clear. So I've kind of gotten rid of this. I don't keep too many sand sifting
right.
fish.
But yeah, the leopard wrasses don't really disturb the sand until they go to bed at night. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. My
Oh
Lenardi
yeah.
does though. Lenardi's always pick it. It picks up sand and swims, and then releases the sand as it's swimming, and it ends up in my corals. Okay. So there are times when my colonies get big and I'm out of town for 2 weeks. I'll come back and there's so much sand is trapped in the coral that sometimes there'll be dead patches because the fish is when it's very hungry, it's always blowing
Yeah.
sand
Yeah. Yeah.
around. When I'm here, it's not as bad because I'm always feeding the fish. Right?
So, Sanjay, you gave a great talk online at MACNA this past. It was August or September. I can't remember when you gave that talk, but it was a couple months ago, and that was basically a talk about pests in the hobby, right? In terms of kind of like
Right.
always having to deal with something, and you've dealt with pretty much everything that's been out there. What most things. So
Most things.
you're currently living with aqua eating flatworms, right? Is that tank, or did you get rid of them?
I didn't. I don't think I got rid of them because I used to see them all the while. I don't see too many right now. So I think the numbers change. So sometimes there'll be a lot of them, and then they kind of fade away. And I found if things are growing well and the tank's like in
Yeah.
fifth gear, coasting along, then I don't get too many problems with the flatworms becoming
Right.
explosive. But when the tank's not doing well, their
Right.
numbers grow. I think the corals get more stressed out. They are able to cause more
Yep.
damage. They get more food, and then they go, "Oh, there's more food, so we should lay more eggs.
Right.
We should propagate. This is a good environment for us." So yeah, I mean, I tried getting rid of them a few times, but it's always a disaster. So I just kind of live
Right.
with them. Uh, which, like I said, they don't seem to really be destroying anything right now.
Yeah, I lived with them in my 225-gallon tank that I used to have back in Connecticut. And in fact, the background picture on the live stream here is of that 225-gallon tank, and I've got acro-eating flatworms in that tank that I used to basically baste with a turkey baster once a week. And
Yep.
actually, my clownfish would follow the turkey baster around and gobble up the flatworms. And I had wrasses in that tank too that I think were eating them.
Yeah, the Wrasses can't find them on the corals.
Oh
I've
yeah.
noticed that. But if you blow them off the rock, every fish will eat them. Even my
Oh
tanks
really?
eat them.
Yeah.
Yeah, every fish eats them. Once they're off the rock and they're floating in the water, they
Yeah.
pick them off. But they don't find them easily on the corals. And when you have so much coral, I mean, there's no way you're going to get rid of them unless you actually effectively try to kill them. And in killing them, you end up killing your corals.
Exactly. That's why I just decided to live with them. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not getting rid of a huge colony just because to get rid of these few flatworms and destroy my tank.
So we
So I just
all
live with
right.
them.
So we got a few more questions popping up. I see Reef Builders is in the house. The doctor is in the house. Is that Jake Adams? I guess I don't know. P guy is asking, does Sanjay use AcroPower or any other aminos? Do you use aminos, Sanjay?
I use them when occasionally. I always get people giving me samples of saying, "Okay, try my aminos, try this, try this." So I'll take it, I'll try it. But I'm not yet a firm believer that they will do stuff in my tank because I haven't seen the difference. But I have seen tanks where it's made a difference,
Oh, really?
right? So yeah. And I think usually it's those tanks that are nutrient poor to begin with.
I
So, I don't see a big difference in my tank whenever I add these
Yeah,
things.
whenever I tried aminos or coral foods, I've pretty much gotten algae outbreaks, and so my use of those products usually doesn't last too long.
Right. Mine doesn't last long because I only get small samples and I try them and they run out of them. I never go out and get replacements for it. Um, but yeah, I think it's got its place, right? And in some tanks, if your corals aren't doing well, they look pale, they're not vibrant, you think you have enough light, then usually it's food that's causing the corals to not look good. And in some cases, those additives will help.
Interesting. Yeah. No, listen, I think
Yeah. But yeah,
some
it's
people do
it's yeah,
claim to have a lot of success with those types of products.
right,
We got another question
right.
here. Faduma, I believe.
I think those people who have a lot of success should once in a while have somebody switch their thing with water and let them keep dosing it, thinking they're dosing aminos, and see if they notice a difference.
Anybody out there willing to take that on? So we got another question. Water changes, no water changes. Yeah, you did mention water changes. What's your routine, Sanjay, in terms of water changes?
It's about 50 gallons every two
Okay.
weeks right now. Yeah. It's sometimes more when I'm breeding clownfish. There's a lot more water changes because I use my tank water as replacement water for the clownfish baby tanks and everything else. But yeah, usually I try to shoot for about 50 gallons every 2 weeks.
So that comes out to what percent? 10%?
10%. It's about a 500
Okay.
gallon tank. That's about 10% every 2 weeks.
So, Sanjay, one of the shows,
It's a nice, convenient size because each bag of salt makes 50
there you
gallons of
go.
water. So,
Makes it nice and easy.
right.
On my last show, I had Greg Hiller on, and we were talking about Bryopsis, and he mentioned that he was using sea urchins to really get rid of the Bryopsis. What are your so obviously, I mean, I'm always an advocate of trying to get rid of problematic algae or pests via natural means versus chemicals. But there are folks out there that do use chemicals like fluconazole and ChemiClean. What are your thoughts on products like that in terms of trying to course correct on a tank that has gone bad?
I, if you've exhausted some of the other options, these are good. These options work, right? So if I always have patches of cyano in my big reef, right? It doesn't bother me, right? There's always be small patches here and there. But there'll be times when it just takes off, right? And it'll spread and it'll be everywhere, and and I don't know what caused it because all the parameters were the same, everything was the same, but there are times when it feels like that something is right in the air and it
Right.
takes off. And I let it go for a while, hoping it'll go away on its own, which sometimes it does. There are times when it doesn't. And when it doesn't go away, I kind of help it along, but I'll put ChemiClean in there, and try to kill
Yeah.
it. And that, generally that resets it again. And, next year I go through the same kind of battle again.
Yeah.
But I try to avoid putting too many chemicals in unless I really
Yep.
have to. But Bryopsis can be nasty again. I've had battles with Bryopsis with the Penn State tank where it was growing
Oh, really?
everywhere. And interestingly, we had two tanks feeding into the same sump. So these systems were both tied together. We would only get Bryopsis in one of the tanks, not in the other one.
Interesting.
So something.
I
Yeah.
tried.
But in that tank, we could not get rid of it. No matter what we tried, it was just way too much. We were harvesting it by hand all the time. The urchins don't really like Bryopsis. Okay, and barely any fish would eat them. At that point, I kind of caved in and I said, you know what? Let's put fluconazole,
Yeah.
or whatever it's called, right? Use that, and it did work.
It
That was only one time I've used it.
got rid of
and
it
worked.
permanently.
Well, nothing.
Yeah, and I tried it. I tried it about a year ago. 6 months ago, to get rid of some Bryopsis, and it went away for a few months, but it did come back.
But not as bad.
Yeah.
That's the thing. If it does come back, it's in smaller patches, and those kind of go away.
Do you think there's any residual bad side effects with those kind of ChemiClean and fluconazole that maybe don't show up on an ICP test that could be detrimental to a reef tank?
Might be, but I think they naturally break down. Whatever effect is, it's short term. So if I put ChemiClean, it's not selectively going to kill cyano. It's going to kill other things too, right? It's a antibacterial, so it's going to kill other bacteria. It might be killing some good bacteria, right? So for a while, it's going to create an imbalance in your tank, bacterial imbalance, but it corrects. I don't recommend people just keep doing this every time on your tank,
Right.
and you end up with some resistant strain of things, and that could be
So
nasty.
Jake is saying Brightwell Razor eradicates hair algae and Valonia, and it's outstanding. Reef and Dive. Sanjay, there's a lot of talk about traces and about keeping tank water exactly like seawater. Do you believe we really need all those trace elements? I mean, we breathe a lot of nitrogen and do not That's how it ends. Do not need. What are your
Do not absorb it. Don't
Yeah.
use it. Yeah. Again, we don't know what these trace elements do. We don't know exactly what they do. We don't know what levels they need to be at, right? So we basically have to guess at what levels we should be keeping them at. A safe bet is let's just keep them at saltwater levels because that's what these corals are growing in. So from that perspective, I think it's a good strategy to say, okay, if I don't know what they're going to do, and instead of arbitrarily adding stuff, well, let me just add enough to bring the composition to a reasonable mix, right? And I think the only tool we have right now is to maybe do an ICP right now to get some low levels. But there are problems with that tool too, right? I mean, it has limits of what it can detect. And some of those trace elements are usually lower than what they can detect. So they really can't tell you exactly. And then whether those trace elements are actually impacting your corals, that's another question, right? So if it makes you comfortable, do it.
Yeah, somebody's action.
I don't do. Okay, I do occasionally. I'll do the ICP test occasionally, and I've done the ICP test when I've had problems with my tank, and it has never found anything. So it's not the answer to
It's interesting because
it's another tool in your arsenal, all right? But it doesn't mean it's going to give you all the answers.
And it can be a little scary to have too much information. I've been doing some ICP testing every now and then just to I guess when the tank is going well, it's good to do it just to have a baseline. And when things are going bad, then maybe you could do it to find out something. But I think having also too much data and being so reactive to that data can also be detrimental. And I think it's good to have the information, but I don't always think it's good to act on the information. I think you really have to be cautious.
Right, because we don't know what it really is doing to our tank, right? I mean, sure, maybe some things use vanadium, but we don't know how much they're using, what they're doing, right? Some sea squirt somewhere uses vanadium. All right, does that mean my reef tank needs to have vanadium? I don't see any well, I do see sea squirts in my tank, but usually you don't see those things, right? So I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I really don't know. And I always tell people, be cautious because you're going to start blaming. If you didn't know, for example, levels of molybdenum in your tank, and if your tank was having any problems and this ICP test came back and said your molybdenum was high, you would just blame molybdenum for it, no matter what it is. You say, oh, that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
But there may be a lot of instances where the high molybdenum did nothing. So you don't really know the cause and effect. That equation is not a direct equation, right? And that equation has also got a lot of time delay in it. In a reef tank, things don't happen overnight, except bad things.
Yes.
Right? If I add I've seen people tell me, oh, I added this additive, and the next day my tank looked awesome.
Yeah.
I'm like, really? How bad was it? I mean, I've kept reefs for so many years, right? For my tank to look 100% improved, I don't know, it would have to go through a lot of improvement overnight. I mean, usually, I've noticed it all the time. I mean, I play around with the corals every time. I'll take a coral that is sitting in one position in my tank, and if I move it to another position, it takes about 2 to 3 months before it adapts to that new position. Right? I'll have corals shading each other. I'll take the shaded part of the coral, which is almost looking bleached, and I'll move it into a brighter spot. And it takes about 3 months for it to fully color up. Right? So there's this whole lag. Right? And so people don't have that patience.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, I was talking.
there's a lot of static.
Is
A lot of
there
static coming in.
static coming from my mic?
I
Is it?
think it's your
Can you
mic.
still hear it? No.
Yeah.
I may, it's bad. Still a lot of bad static. Let me try switching up mics here. Bear with me. Is that better?
No,
Can you guys hear me?
I don't know.
Hang on 1 second.
It's not me. I haven't changed anything.
Hang on.
Something changed.
Can you hear me now, Sanjay?
Oh yeah, now it's
Now you can hear me?
loud and clear. Yeah. Oh yeah,
All right,
much
I'm having
better.
a hard time hearing you. Let's see here. How's that? All right.
Works pretty
So,
good now.
yeah. What was I going to say? I was texting back and forth with a friend of mine, and he actually might be watching tonight about ICP testing. And he said he got back this ICP test that just showed a whole bunch of issues with his tank, and he's like, "Geez, I'm not sure what to do with all this stuff. It seems like I'm gonna have to do a lot of course correcting." I'm like, "Well, hold it. I thought your tank was on cruise control and things were going great." He's like, "Well, yeah, it is." I was like, "I wouldn't do anything." Let's see what else we've got.
Yeah, it's made people more reactive,
Yeah.
and sometimes that too much reactiveness is not good because things take time to adjust and adapt.
So, Sanjay, I don't want to keep you too much longer here, but so I want to ask you one more question, and then we'll take maybe one more question from the audience. But if you had to list the top 3 things that's most important for keeping an SPS, a successful SPS tank, what would you say those top 3 things are?
The top 3 things in keeping a
Yeah,
successful
SPS in
tank,
particular.
I would say, I think you need to maintain your alkalinity is the number one thing. Okay. Well, assuming you have good lighting and lots of good water flow. Lighting and water flow are going to be very important, right? And then the third thing is your water quality. And in the water quality, generally stability is important. And I've seen tanks can take swings in temperatures. So a fully loaded SPS tank does not like swings in alkalinity. That's where I've had the most issues with my tank is when alkalinity swings a lot. Um, so I think that keeping that at a fairly stable level is important. And it doesn't matter what level you keep it at. I mean, if you, as long as you're, not below 6 or 7. Uh, so if you keep it at 8, 9, 10, I've kept it at 11, 12, all the way up to
Consistent.
15. That's
Yeah.
getting a little too far. I wouldn't recommend going to 15, right? Because in a tank like mine, if I don't have a calcium reactor, the alkalinity will drop by about 2 dkh in one day. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
fairly rapid drop. So I think that is one important one. And then again, keeping all the parameters at reasonable levels. They don't have to be exact. Nothing has to be exact, right? So I always tell people define a range, right? That's reasonable. And then operate within that range and you'll be fine. Right? So I'll keep my alkalinity between 8 and 9 and I'm happy with it now, It's got room to go down a little bit, it's got room to go up a little bit. Same thing with temperature, My temperature in my tank doesn't stay constant. I don't run a chiller, right? So it'll run there's a 3 to 4 degree temperature swing during the day. I mean, corals see that in the wild. I mean, there's no need to keep it exactly the same temperature all the time. Same thing with a lot of the parameters. I mean, you can keep a healthy reef tank going with calcium levels of 370, you know. But if you drop your alkalinity down to 6 or something, then you'll definitely see slowing growth, right? But also there's a balance of things, right? I've noticed, again, this is all through my experimentation. There's no very strong evidence to back any of that. But when my tank was running at high nitrates and high phosphates, bumping up the alkalinity seemed to help the tank, right? But when those phosphate and nitrate levels came down, keeping the alkalinity at 11 or 12 was not helping. Okay. So I think there is that balance of all those things, the nutrients, the alkalinity, the lighting, the flow, right? Um, so nothing beats experience, right? You learn a lot by doing it. Yeah. And then impatience. I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, I've always been very impatient, but I've learned a lot of patience
Yeah, you
dealing
got
with
to be
reefs.
patient in this hobby. That's for sure. That's for sure.
Right.
So you
Yeah.
didn't mention lighting.
I didn't
Did you
mention
say?
lighting.
Oh, you said
I said
lighting.
lighting
Okay,
is
I
important. I
missed
said
that.
lighting. I said
Okay,
assuming you have good lighting
gotcha.
and good water
Yeah,
flow, then the third thing
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
water chemistry, right? And everything we do is to maintain that water chemistry, right? That's all we're doing. And really, you could maintain a tank by just doing water changes. But we all think it's too much work, so we have to, put skimmers, we have to put phosphate removers, you put other forms of exporting whatever's building up in your tank, right? Um, and trace elements, again, doing a water change brings in trace elements too. So
Yeah, and that we're going to end with this last question from Dano's Reef. He had a question about water changes. And essentially, have you ever tried not doing water changes? And if so, what effect did it have on your corals? Have you ever tried that?
yeah, I mean, I've gone through long periods of time where I've not done water changes, you know. Um, but I just always find that doing a water change, it just kind of seems to perk up the corals a little bit. Especially in the softy tank, you can definitely see it. Okay, they just seem to perk up, and same thing happens with the SPS sometimes. They just perk up a little bit, and maybe it's the trace, maybe it's whatever it is. Uh, they just seem to
Yeah,
like it.
I agree. I've always been a water change person myself.
And one bag of water, one bag of salt every 2 weeks is not too
Not
bad.
bad at all. Well, listen, Sanjay, thank you so much for hanging out with us and chatting. It's been a pleasure as usual. Any final thoughts before we sign off here?
No, thanks for having me. It's fun. I mean, this is kind of nice to hang out and talk to other reef people instead of being
Yeah,
holed up at
right.
home and
Well,
being
yeah, no,
isolated from all social interaction with
yeah,
other
no. This
reefers.
is definitely some nice way to kind of get out and mingle virtually or online, however you want to call it. But yeah, we'll keep the fingers crossed that there'll be trade shows and frag swaps and what have you, hopefully in 2021. And yeah, but
Right.
until then, I guess we'll just keep doing what we're doing and pay a lot of attention to our tanks, which is a good thing.
Yep. That's been nice. I actually got my
Yeah,
tanks to
yeah,
look
yeah,
good
yeah.
again.
All right, Sanjay. Well, listen, thanks again
Yeah.
so much, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Love to have you back on the live stream next year if you can come and peel yourself away again. That would be awesome. But everybody, listen, thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Going to probably be off for a couple of weeks and come back after Thanksgiving. But until then, be safe, be well, and see you next time.
All right. Thanks, everyone.